Hey there, everybody. So I've got a Shimano 5800 front derailleur. So this style derailleur is basically the first generation of 11-speed front derailleurs. Since this design have changed it, but had a question from a viewer the other day wanting some tips on how to set this thing up, and they were having some issues with shifting and rubbing and stuff like that. So figured I'd just make a quick little video on some tips and things on this. But what I'm going to do, this one actually is on and it's functioning. This is on my personal bike. So what I'm going to do is basically just take this thing off, disassemble it, and kind of show the steps that how I use to put it together and a few of the things. There's a little tool that goes on the back side of here to kind of gauge your alignment. I don't have that tool, but we're just going to kind of wing it. I'll show you some tips how to do it without that tool. So yeah, let's pull this thing off and just get right to it. So the tools we're going to need to work on this are a 5mm hex key, 4mm hex key, 2mm hex key, and then got this, it's a JIS or Japanese industry standard Phillips screwdriver there. So you can use a normal one, but this one just engages into those Shimano screws and such a little better. Okay, so we got our derailleur off here, cleaned up a little bit. So let's say I just kind of go through and identify some of the parts and things. So you got your arm there, and that's your little anchor bolt or your fixing bolt. And there's a little piece right here that's a kind of a source of confusion. It's just a little pin that you can alternate in two different directions, just depending on which angle your the ship cable's coming up there. So we'll get into that in just a minute. But you got your little correction pin there, your anchor bolt. Got the high and low limit screws, and those are just, it's pretty easy to identify these. They don't have a H or a L, but they're just going to be, that'll be for your small ring, for your big ring there. So that's kind of an easy way to understand that or whatever. The little stabilization pin, and you just access that. It's kind of maybe difficult to see, but there's a 2mm hex key port inside of there, and then your 5mm bolt there to attach it to your braze-on mount. Now this derailleur it's a braze-on style. There's going to be a clamp style as well for seat tubes that are round that you can just clamp the derailleur on there. And with that style, we won't be having to worry about as much with the little stabilization screw there and the back plate that we'll put on. So other than that, the clamp-on style, we won't be using that piece. So pretty straightforward. But anyways, what we're going to want to do first is basically just we're going to position this on the bike and kind of get a baseline of our adjustments and such there. Okay, so we got our cable coming straight out of the frame there. This particular frame has a little hole. Some of them may have a guide or something underneath, but most of the time you're pretty well dedicated to where this is coming up. There's not really an industry standard as far as frames as to where the exact location of this cable exiting up there. So that's kind of the downfall to this particular derailleur, and that if the angle's too shallow coming in, this thing's got to try to pull, and going into its initial throw, it's difficult to start it from a super tight angle like that. So if they're super far in, that's kind of why you've got this one's got the little pin. Some others have a kind of a C-shaped washer that goes under the anchor bolt there. So anyway, what we're going to do first, just kind of tuck that wire out of our way, and we're just going to kind of roughly mock this up into the little hanger there, or the braze-on mount. We're using the 5mm on this part. We're basically just going to roughly kind of guesstimate a ballpark of where we're going to need to go to start. So we want to have this between the teeth and the bottom of the derailleur. We want about a 1 to 3mm gap there. So before we do that, what I like to do is this is just kind of a temporary adjustment. We're going to basically tighten in our low limit until the outer plate of the derailleur here is sitting just directly over the big chainring there. So that'll give us a guide there. So from here we can just raise it up roughly so we know that's height-wise we're going to be, so we can cinch this down to where it's not going to move up and down, but we want to still be able to tinker with the angle there, I guess you could say. So I'm going to just go ahead and back our little stabilization screw out. I'm just going to totally redo my settings here. So at this point you got this angle here versus this angle here. We want to have this to start with kicked inwards, maybe a degree and a half just to start. If you may have noticed, I had the little back plate already installed onto the frame, but if you needed to put that on, this would be the point where, you know, once you have it set up like that, usually what I'll do is, you know, we got a rough setup where we're going to have it. I'll tighten this in just to the point where it just touches the bare frame, maybe to make a little score in the clear coat or something. Take everything back off and then put the little backing plate right over that little mark, and then that's where your setup's going to be there. So anyway, we got that got it positioned there about a degree or so in. This isn't touching the plate yet. And then we'll go ahead and just cinch this down. So we're all tight here. You can see there's still quite a bit of wiggle, and that's just because the little stabilization screw is not contacted yet. So you can see it just started to contact. We're getting some movement there. So that kind of preloads it and gets it in a pretty stable spot. So I like to just get this to where it's more or less parallel with the big ring, or maybe just, it kind of varies depending on your chain line. But on this bike, it seemed like if I have it kicked out towards the outside slightly, right about there is where I had it. So we got our barely got some clearance here. Go ahead and take a look at that. Alright, so we got that to where we're between 1 and 3 millimeters of clearance between the top of the chain rings, as far as going off the tallest is what you want to go by there. The tallest teeth there, and then the bottom to the bottom of the outer plate here. Alright, so we've got it here from the rear view. I went ahead and pulled the chain off and then the back wheel just so we could get a good visual here. So with the little alignment gauge that you would put on there, basically it just centers up in the fixing bolt there, the anchor bolt, and then it plugs into here, and it kind of gives you a little guide as far as the angle of this coming up basically centered with the bolt, and then where you should position your converter pin here, either in or out. The other style, the older Dura Ace, it's got a set pin, and then it's got a little C-clip with two little nubs on the bottom that you just position one way or the other. So I don't have that one as an example. This one's definitely more common, so you know, I'll put a PDF link at the end with the Shimano's actual dealer manual, so you can kind of study that as well. But anyway, just kind of from what I've seen, I don't have the little tool here, so if you kind of just center the pull it straight up and then just kind of center it over the bolt hole, and then this is with this, the outer plate directly kind of hovering over the big chainring there. So coming straight up, you got this little main, the back pivot in the body of the derailleur. If the cable is centered over that or going that way, you would want to put it with the converter on, so the pin closer this way. If your cable is outside of this little pin here, you would want the converter off, which then the pin would be further in that way, I believe. So yeah, so anyway, it looks like mine, the converter is on, and looks like I'm pretty squarely over the pivot, maybe inwards just a little, so I guess we're on the correct page here. But if I was the other way, I'll show you how to switch this around real quick. Okay, so with our little 2mm hex key, we'll just, there's a little hole there on the back side of where that piece is, and as you push on it, it'll come out. You can do that with this, you know, not necessarily with the cable hooked up, but with that all the way threaded in, you can basically take and push it out, twist it, and just manually with your finger push it back in. But this would be with the converter on, with this little pin further that way. Twist it around. That's the converter off. So basically, as the cable comes up, it's just going to come up and over the pin there, depending on which location it's in, and then up, and then just straight out through the top there. And that's where you want to cinch it down there in either position. But we're going to do this with the converter on. That's the furthest one inwards there. And you know, I'm not really, we could do a little experiment and just see if what happens if we have it in the wrong position. But I don't know, this one in particular wouldn't seem to work fine before, so I'll probably just leave it there. But if you're having issues with it, you know, you can check that with without the little tool, so that'll kind of give you a good reference. But if it just won't work with one way, you can always try it the other way, I guess. Okay, so what we're going to do now, we're just about to install our cable, but what I want to do first, this is, I think where most folks make the major mistake on these as far as performance-wise, where they don't really work that well. So this chainring and crankset, it's a SRAM chainring there, so it's not going to have that kind of that little bubble out like the Shimano chainrings will. So anyway, according to Shimano, you want to stick an Allen wrench or a flat surface, and it should be about parallel, you know, all within this same plane. But I found that generally it works a little better if you take, and we're going to adjust our low limit screw to where this sticks out just a little beyond. So if you're looking down at it, maybe this plate is, as far as the center line of this versus the center line of your top ring, I'd say I've got that out maybe 4 millimeters or so beyond the two center lines there. So what that does is it just allows this to be really tight. I'm not using one of those little inline barrel adjusters or anything like that. So this is, I pretty much like to set it and just have it there, stress the cable a little bit, and then it's in a location that works. It's not going to come loose or anything with those inline adjusters backing their way out. Alright, so we're going to go ahead and just take our anchor bolt, fixing bolt, all the way out there, just so you can get a good visual on this. But that's going to come out just under there, and then it'll come up. So it's going to, once this bolt is in here, which I'll go ahead and stick that on in here, and there's a little groove along the top side of the arm here. So you want to just pull that straight up. Usually try to get that, just pull it snug there. And then from there you're good to tighten it down. So you may notice there's just a hair slack in there, but that's just, as you tighten this, it just kind of wants to naturally pull everything inwards there just a little bit. Okay. So usually what you can do at this point, I forgot to mention when you start, before you hook this up, make sure the shifter, you've got all the slack out, so it's in all the low position with that trim. There's 4 actual little clicks, which I kind of went over in my video on the newer style 5801 and up from there. So the shift levers do the same exact thing, but you want to just make sure all the slack is out before you connect this. So anyway, we can do from there, usually just a quick test. I'll go ahead and just take the shifter and take it all the way up, and it's kind of a matter of, you got to adjust the, have the rear derailleur set up, and you can kind of go through the range in the back and then see where it goes. But we'll get into that in just a second. But this one is just as a shortcut. My high limit screw should already be set because it was in the correct location. So if I hit the first trim down, we got a little bit of movement in there. That maybe, if it's doesn't move at all, that will be a good indication that the cable's a little tight. But again, not to make this super confusing, that's just because my high limit screw was already set up there and everything. So gonna do now is I'm gonna go ahead and lower this. I'm backing off the low limit screw, and it's only going to go so far before the cable tension just doesn't allow this to go any further. So I'm going to take it all the way to that point. So I can't, it's not moving, it's not responding to the screw anymore. So I'm going to go in just a touch. So just so they're lined up with each other, those 2 points of reference. So now I'm going to put the chain and everything back on, and then we'll go through and start tuning on it. Alright, so what I did at this point was went ahead and backed my low limit set screw all the way out like we just said, where it just is touching where the cable tension is letting it out. Now I'm over in my this largest cog in the rear. So we've got just a little bit of clearance between the inner plate and the chain, but we want to, with this lowest trim there, we actually want a little bit more than that. So our cable's just slightly tight. I think what probably, since I'm using the same cable and everything, the portion where I had this set out about 4 millimeters, I think 3 millimeters out would be a little better angle to shoot for. Maybe new cables and everything, 4 millimeters might be a good point. But I think what we're going to do, just to try a little experiment, okay, so rather than just loosen the cable, I think what I'm going to try first, just as a little experiment, is to flip the little, turn the converter off. Put it in that position, just see what it changes. And let's go back to the, take our low limit screw to where we're just beyond. We're going to shoot for 3 mils this time. See where that takes us. That thing's flipped around, so see if we're any better, makes any difference at all. Alright, so I'm going to do that back again. I'm just going to start loosening up my low limit. Yeah, it's I can tell you right now it's way worse as far as that initial the initial pull, it's way harder to get it to requires a lot of hand effort to make that thing start going through its pull there. So we're gonna go ahead and just reverse that back. There we go. And I would say when in doubt, I would even probably put it in that position with it the furthest point over. Alright. Cinch our cable back down and see where that gets us. Okay, so I think when I tightened my cable, I was inadvertently maybe one trim click up, but either which way, with this thing all the way out, I've got a little bit of slack in the cable here, and it just clears there at the bottom. But I believe it's just because this derailleur is basically bottomed out on itself, so it's physically not going to go any further in. So what happens if you try to shift from this position, you get that going on where it's not quite pulling all the way up. But if I manually, if I push that down, it'll manually go up to the gear, but we're just not getting enough enough cable pull. So that's a pretty good indicator right there. If this thing is that loose with all the trim, everything out, it should be a little bit tighter than that. So let's try this one more time. Take our low limit screw, shooting for approximately 3 mils out. Back that back down to its normal spot. That feels better. So we go all the way down. I can't move that any further, so we're all the way out there as far as cable's pulling right up against the high limit stop there. So as we go, I'm going to start shifting up the cassette here to the point where I hear it start to rub. It'll happen, the chain will rub on this inner plate, start making noise once if you're in the big ring, start going up the high end of the cassette. So just starting to get some rubbage there. Get my trim and full cross chain with no rubbing. So back down on the cassette, just double check my. Yeah, we're good there as well. And what you want here, you don't want the chain to rub, but you don't want a gap that's, you want this outer plate to be about as close to the chain as you can get it without rubbing in the small cog, big ring combination. So if you have any more gap than that, you can actually, if you're having issues with the chain high siding over this side of the derailleur, that's too far out. So you need to tighten your high limit screw. And then, it's kind of the same thing as we go big cog in the back. That's shifted down. We've got our trim there, so we've got just a little bit of a gap there between the little plastic guide plate and the chain there. So yeah, that's gonna pretty much conclude this little tutorial. So hopefully that clears up some mysteries or gives some folks some tips that are trying to set one of these up. And yeah, that's gonna do it. So thanks for watching.